Hello, hello. Thank you everybody for being here today. Today we're fortunate enough to get to speak with Rex Burke, the author of Orphan Planet. And just first and foremost, really hats off to you. This was a complete page turner. I know it's the first in the series and it left off it left me wanting to read more 100%. I'm excited to, but just so much of this story stuck out to me. There are times where you felt down with the characters, there are times where you felt up with the characters. The relationships between characters, that was something I really wanted, that really stood out. The jokes that you threw in there, it was just 10 out of 10, a fantastic read, and just thank you so much for being a part of all this.
No, well, thank you. That's so nice to hear. I mean, that's my first sci-fi novel, so that's really gratifying to hear that.
As a first life, because I know you have a history of, was it travel novels? Or not
Uh,
novels, but like kind of.
Guidebooks, yeah, yeah. I spent my career as a writer, but it was in travel. So I was a guidebook writer for rough guides and for other people for a long time. And that's kind of how I ate my living, traveling around the world and writing about it. So the sci-fi was a lockdown COVID departure for me, like so many other people. I had some time, and I definitely wasn't going traveling. So I did something I'd always wanted to do, and just started writing one day, and that's what turned into Orphan Planet.
That's that's a really cool origin story. Was it always going to be sci-fi? Was that always the kind of plan in the back of your mind?
Yeah, I never. Yeah, I mean, I suppose I'm one of these. I mean, everyone's got a novel in them and all that, and I guess I'd always thought about writing one. I just never had. When I did come to think of it, I thought, yeah, yeah, it would probably be sci-fi. It's what I've always really loved reading. Um, over the years. So I guess if I was going to go in, it could have been a thriller, I suppose. But I don't really have I don't have I don't know what the word is, the tenacity to figure out a thriller plot, a crime novel or something, and follow it all the way through with the twists and turns. But sci-fi appealed to me for all sorts of reasons, not least because you can just make it all up, because who's to say that this stuff isn't going to happen or can't happen? I liked that really. um, and I wanted to kind of write a story, the sort of stories that that I'd want to read, really, which are not, I read a ton of sci-fi, and I read a lot of sort of hard sci-fi and the military sci-fi and and space opera and all that kind of stuff. But I can never write that. That was not really what I wanted to do. I really enjoyed reading it, but if I was going to write anything, it was going to be, well, who knows what the word is, cozy, soft, feel good, all those kind of words. But I wanted to write a story that made people feel good about reading it, that finished on a high, whatever that was going to be. And yeah, and that's where I went with it.
No, and I think very much you accomplished that. Just the whole idea of, like you said, leaving on a high, and it felt a lot more about the journey than the destination. And even the moments in the story that were bleak, they weren't it came back up really quickly. And
Yes, you're joking every time.
yeah, there's always some sort of joke. And I
That's
apologize because I forget the AI's name off the top of my head, but that was also just,
Reeves.
I'm sorry, repeat that.
Reeves
Yes,
after Keanu.
Reeves. Um, just that little, oh man, the snide humor in the background constantly, but also that reassuring presence. It had a huge impact on at least my reading experience as well.
Yeah, I mean, when I thought about what kind of book I was going to write, and you can, you know, I'm not comparing myself to them, but you can see the lineage in the books. You can see that it's Douglas Adams. You can see it's the sort of red dwarf, snarky, sentient AI kind of thing. And so there was always going to be one of those characters in it. There has to be. That's the rule for this kind of book. So it was just a matter of coming up one, and I don't think he does. I don't think he does anything different particularly than that kind of character than you would normally expect. But I liked figuring out his tone. I liked figuring out what kind of person he was, and just this permanently exasperated AI, just really wanting to light these people that he was in charge of, but not really understanding about why they did things or how they worked, or yeah. And it was, yeah, that was fun. I liked that.
I wrote about Douglas Adams in my notes so much when I was reading it initially the first time. And I'm sure I've said to you, Rex, I think the last thing that you sent me to read for a Scott check
Yeah.
for I was immediately like, God, it's not even in space, and it's still got that very kind of Douglas Adams feel to it. What I wanted to ask you about the other writers that you enjoy reading, about the other, like who you would say influenced your style the most, because Douglas Adams is an obvious one, but I picked up a lot of old kind of classic sci-fi as well. I picked up quite a lot of Red Dwarf and stuff in there. A little bit of yeah, a little bit of that. Tell me what it was that fed into it. What's the DNA of your kind of writing style?
I think that's it. I think you're right. I mean, I wasn't trying to model myself on anyone in particular, and I kind of shy away from the Douglas Adams stuff only because it's a bit done to death, and everyone says it's the new Douglas Adams, and that's fine. But to be honest, it must be 30 years since I've read those books. So while I have read them, I couldn't say I was modeling myself. And also, when you say that your books like Douglas Adams, everyone immediately has this idea about it. And a load of people, like when I was trying to find readers for the first book, Orphan Planet. So I was trying to find ARC readers to take copies to give me some early reviews. And a lot of people just said a straight no when I said, well, it's a bit like Douglas Adams, because they weren't, they've seen that before. They weren't interested. And so it's a shame. So I've kind of shy away from that now. I don't use that comparison at all, really, which is why I went much more for the idea that I went much more for the themes and the tropes in it. It's a feel-good novel. It's about found family. It's about relationships. That's what it's really about. It just happens to be set in space, And if there is a theme running through it, it's this whole idea of family and found family and who your family really is. So, but in terms of other writers, I think it's really difficult for me to say who I was influenced by. As I said, I've read pretty much all the classic sci-fi, but I mean, I don't think it reads like any of those in particular. It has the sort of the mix of the humor and the relationships and thing. Becky Chambers a bit like that. I've been reading, her recently, and so it has a bit of that vibe going on. The found family stuff, a bit like TJ Klune, maybe, in the sort of fantasy realm. It's like, these people shoved together and the way they talk to each other. And it was really important to me that they sounded like real people. It's hard to write dialogue that and it's one of the most difficult things to do, to write dialogue in a book that actually sounds like it's the sort of thing people might say. And so, I kind of had an in with that because mine was about teenagers, and I have teenagers, growing up with them in the house. So it was very easy. It was very easy just to write ludicrous things down that they said all the time, and just like, right, I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that. So, if they do sound like real people and real teenagers, I think that's because I've just stolen loads of it from what was going on around me.
Well, that was going to be the follow-up for me, is that in terms of a story with dialogue and inter-character relationships and stuff, I think you absolutely hit it out of the park, because a lot of it felt incredibly real. Like, a lot of times, just, I don't want to say like I could see myself in it, but there were interactions where like, oh yeah, I've done this, or I know people who do this kind of thing. And I know that Steve used to be a teacher. So I kind of want to see how that all, like, Steve, how did it feel for you reading it with a teacher background?
Well, I made loads of notes about it. I thought the is patter a word for anyone else? The chat between the kids bouncing back and forward, it had that ping pong thing going on where everyone's just trying to score points against each other constantly. But what I thought made it more realistic and more like, because they're all siblings technically, I guess, was the sibling versus sibling interrelationships, the way that everyone's, half of the things that they say aren't even words, it's little looks to each other across the room, little nods and unsaid things, which anyone with siblings or anyone who's got like a family where there's little teams within the family knows exactly what that's like. I thought the portrayal of the kids in it was maybe my favorite thing about it, and I didn't expect to like the kids so much. I stopped being a teacher because I really don't like large groups of children. I found out that was not my kind of jam. But I loved the kids in it, man. I thought they were they felt like a little team of superheroes or something. They were all very unique. They all had their own thing going on. I
Yeah,
remembered them really quickly, which was impressive too. There was like, how many is there? There's like six, seven of
6.
them.
Yeah, yeah,
Some of them, I was like, I'm never going to remember these 6 names. Literally did not have a problem remembering any of them. And then the pop culture references that they keep dropping, even though it's not really their pop culture, they're talking about things like Alien and everything all the time. I just thought that's exactly how kids speak. They all speak in references to their own in jokes that
yeah.
Jordan just has absolutely no lead into. And so I've been where Jordan's been on the outside of groups of children being like, what on earth are they talking? What are these words that they've made up? And so, especially nowadays, I'm sure you know that, Rex, with if you've got teenagers of your own. But I thought it was fantastic. It felt very much like getting thrown into a class and having to take them with no prior knowledge.
Yeah.
But I thought the existential dread that Jordan feels when he gets out of cryo freeze and finds out he's got to be a teacher again. I was like, oh, that made my heart speed up a little bit.
Yeah,
Nothing worse.
yeah. No, well, that's really interesting. I mean, there's probably 2 things to say about that. The kids were always in the book. It's called Orphan Planet. I had the title from the minute I started writing. I didn't really know why, and then, as you said, they're not really orphans, but they are, and they're not really siblings, but they are. They've all grown up together. But they started out, maybe for the first few weeks that I was writing this, they were only ever really a vehicle for showing us how hopeless Jordan was, the main character, at understanding anything. Because he's a history teacher, a history tutor at university, he doesn't know anything about space or science or how physics works or all the rest of it. And they were kind of a sort of know-it-all vehicle to show him up. And then the relationships just kind of developed. I mean, I'm quite it wasn't an intricate, I don't intricately plot these novels. I had a beginning and an end, and I kind of knew the story arc, but I just let them at it after a while, and their relationships developed, and that was a joy to me. I really enjoyed that, and then obviously they become far more important as the series goes on. But that really wasn't how they started, and I wasn't quite sure what to do with them. But then they just kind of took the story over, and that's great when that happens.
Yeah, they really drove the story. I love once they got to the planet, once they got onto, and we're going to talk about Dave at some point, but once they landed on Dave, and it was, I really loved that was the point at which Jordan's completely useless knowledge, which was of no use on the spaceship, suddenly he was the expert again now.
There you
So I
go.
was like, oh, the kids are relying on him, but man, they ended up, they were really the heroes of the part as well. They were, with all their strange little skills and everything. I really loved it. I really loved it. I feel like getting onto the planet flipped the dynamic
Yeah,
in a really interesting way, and it gave Jordan the chance to do some cool stuff. I felt like there was a lot of like. It's funny that you talk about how a lot of it was kind of free form and just off the cuff, because I made loads of little notes being like, this feels really deliberate. A lot of this feels quite deliberate, like a historian who doesn't know much about his own time. He knows more about the Vikings than he does about the films that were out when he was on Earth. All this useless knowledge for a new world, all the pop culture references that have new context. It felt like it was playing with time a little bit. So I don't know how much of that was deliberate. Was a lot of it planned out in advance in terms of the themes, or did you roll with that as well?
yeah, a little bit of both. I mean, it was deliberate. I mean, in case it's not entirely clear, Jordan is clearly me. So, I mean, I've read every sci-fi, I've been reading sci-fi since I was 10 years old. I still couldn't tell you, how far away Mars is, or how a spaceship works, or what a fusion drive actually is, or, none of that stuff. Couldn't explain any of it. And so I loved that. That was great, because my starting point with this was starting with Jordan was someone like me. I wanted to write a sci-fi book where you didn't have to know anything about the science for it to be enjoyable. And I didn't want anything in there that had to be explained. I'm watching Three Body Problem at the moment on Netflix. I mean, I read the book. My God, I mean, it's a great book, but couldn't understand a word of it. It's a bit more explicable on Netflix right now. But you know, there's a ton of science in that, and you kind of have to concentrate and really understand it to work out what the story's about. And I didn't want that at all. I just wanted him to be in this unfamiliar location and unfamiliar environment and have stuff happen to him. And on the basis that, you know, we all go around our daily lives. You know, I get in my car every day and drive it. I have no idea how the car works. I don't need to know how it works. You know, I just get in and it works. And I thought that should be for the same for someone waking up on a spaceship who's in cryosleep, who's just going on a colony ship, you know, heading off to another planet. He doesn't need to know about this stuff. And the humor is in having that stuff shown to him and explained to him. And then, as you say, it gets switched around when we go to a planet where he actually does have some skills because he's been camping and all the rest of it. So yeah, so you know, so I guess a lot of that is me. So I was putting in some of my pet hates and pet, you know, likes and all the rest. That was in there. The pop culture stuff, that's really interesting. A load of people pick that up. They say, you know, of course, this pop culture isn't the kid. You know, they're all 15 when they meet them. They celebrate the 16th birthday during the book. You know, and the year is now, you know, it's 2020, 23, 24, whatever it is. Why on earth would they be having, you know, all these pop culture references of a basically a baby boomer? That's what Jordan is, because he's, you know, pretty much my age, a bit younger than me. And the answer is, of course, because they were, you know, born on a spaceship that had left Earth and had no contact with Earth and were brought up by a load of 40 and 50-year-old crew. And that was, you know, those are their references. But I only did that. That was deliberate because I was making it easy for myself. I'm lazy because otherwise I'd have to have invented like a million films, made up films and made up music genres and stuff. And I could have done that, but then none of the jokes would have made sense really, because you'd be making fun of something that nobody else had a reference for.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm not going to do that. You know, that to me, have putting in all these 80s film references and 70s and 90s music and all the rest of it, which was then entirely explicable within the shape of the story. I could just do that without thinking about it because that's my stuff. So yeah, that was, and so it was laziness on my part, but it did mean that I could just mine those scenes for humor every time without having to think up yet another, you know, made up name of some 22nd century rapper or whatever it was going to be, you know. So yeah.
No, and I think it came together really nicely because I believe it was Red Darkling we featured in the past, and they had completely invented an entire genre of everything, which in itself was incredibly impressive, but it allows for a different type of comedy than what you're doing here. But I just want to go back to what you were saying before about kind of, you don't need to know science to appreciate this book. 'Cause like you said, the book is about relationships. And I think that's for us what really, really stood out about it. And part of the main reason why we wanted to include it is that so many sci-fi books can be so intimidating and so, I guess scary is the same word, but like you need to have a master's in something to understand what's going on. So the fact that your story was so accessible to all, and then, sorry, excuse me, so accessible to all, but then following up with that by including all of these pop culture references that we already understand, just made it even more accessible going forwards.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to write an adventure story, really, and it's set in space because I like sci-fi, and that was really the long and the short of it. The best things people have said to me about this are the people who say, I really like the book, I don't normally read sci-fi, and I think that's great, you know, because that's exactly what I like. I don't want it to be you know, it sits on a sci-fi shelf, because where else could it go? But that's not my sole readership, I hope. You know, it's an entertaining adventure. I kind of see it as like one of those, you know, this is going back into pop culture references that I even mind, but the sort of Saturday morning cinema serials that they had in the 50s and 60s, you know, it's that kind of feel of another episode every week and a sort of big old adventure on a distant planet. And, you know, it was that kind of feel I was going for, really.
No, of course.
Lost in Space, I guess, is another touchstone with that, you know.
I'm sure I can pair that the other day on Twitter. when I was talking about this interview coming up, and I was like, it's like a Lost in Space, Found Family kind of Robinson Crusoe with like Douglas Adams shot through it kind of thing. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's a good. That's yeah.
One of the things I really want to talk about, and if you've made it like 20 minutes into this and you haven't read the book, go back and read the book. There are spoilers. There will be spoilers. The fact that you named the planet Dave had me crying. It was
Oh my god.
it was by far one of the funniest things. And I think it goes back to just how relatable that was. Because I reread that scene, I think it was yesterday or the day before, about like Jordan's trying to bring everybody back up after bad news had struck. And so he comes up with, oh, we can name the planet. And it was like a really kind of heartwarming moment and a good bonding experience, like a good like bonding moment for everybody. But then that whole idea of like a kid laughing and then whispering something to somebody else who then has to be the adult in the room, you're like, okay, he said this. Like that little interaction, I think just summed up how well done the intercharacter relationships were and how like you wrote teenagers. You did a
Yeah.
really good job writing teenagers. These weren't just adults with less knowledge than kids, and these weren't just kids pretending to be adults. Like they very much fit the bill. So yeah, when they named the planet Dave, I was like, yeah, that is something my idiot self would do. And that was just
Yeah.
fantastic because then it
Yeah.
stuck over time.
Yeah, I was always looking for an opportunity to get those kind of, exchanges, those kind of backs and forths into their dialogue. Because you're right, to me, that's how teenagers talk. It's really, it's really nice to hear that I nailed that, because that's really what I was going for. It's like, you'll know as a teacher, the worst thing you could ever do. I mean, I'm not a teacher, I've never been a teacher, but it strikes me, having seen the movies, the worst thing you can ever do is stand up with a class and kind of feel a bit of fear, but also just ask. If you stand up in a class like Jordan does at first and says, is there anything you want to ask me, immediately they're all just going to say, are you married, sir? What do you mean? Why not? What's wrong with you? Have you got a girlfriend? Have you got a boyfriend? Why haven't you? That's where they're all going to go.
Well,
So,
like we might not all have been teachers, but we've definitely all been students.
yeah. So,
Oh yeah.
I just liked getting those kind of exchanges in, and it just struck me that if you're a particularly eegety kind of 16-year-old boy, as this particular character pool is, then you're definitely going to want to call the planet Dave. And then they spend there's 3 books in this series. They spend the next 2 books trying to just lose that, but of course that's too late then.
It's stuck.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was later on in the story. What was it? Like they have the little, because they've kind of built their little community, as it were. And I think it was Dave Town, or
Yeah.
yeah,
There's
the little stick. I thought it was brilliant.
It was similar to I'd read one of Rex's new pieces that he's writing just now to do some. I don't think you'd call it sensitivity reading. Scott's sensitivity reading.
Well, it kind of was. I mean, for some context, I'm writing, and one of my current works in progress is it's a book about aliens hiding in a Scottish loch. And I mean, I'm clearly not Scottish, and I didn't want to offend anyone. And I thought, what I really need, and it's quite right what to call it, I don't know, what I really need is a sensitivity reader. Who do I know that could look at this? And because really, and I mean, I was anxious not to offend Scots people just accidentally by using the wrong kind of words out of context. Mainly, I spent a lot of that book, making fun of English people, and I just wanted to check that was okay as well, really. So it was you had a twofold job.
Well, what I had found was, and I'd said this to you, Rex, I'm sure, was that you've got a really great mastery of knowing how often to repeat something to make it funny. Like in in this new one that you're writing about the aliens, every time that they refer to them as, they're just like, oh, English, right? Like after the 3rd or 4th time, it started tickling me, and then every time it happened, I was gone. I was like, oh, the poor man. So the same thing happened with Dave, where it was just like, yep, that was funny. 2 chapters later, it comes up again, and I'm gone again. But it's funnier than it's. When your friend says something funny, and then like 4 days later, you bring it up and laugh about it all over again.
Yeah.
But there was
I wrote down.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say there was also that element. I think there was a section where you were joking about kind of just English history and like little avenues like that, which me not being English, I found absolutely hilarious, but I don't know how a British person would take it.
Well, um, yeah, I haven't had any complaints, but a lot of those things are my kind of, I mean, I did study history. The only point of contact I have with Jordan is that I did study history at university. That was what I did, years and years and years ago. But yeah, I mean, a lot of those things in there are just kind of my pet hobby horses, I suppose, or and I fed them in as I fed them in as I went. But yeah, it's a very English book. People have said that. That's true. The humor is particularly English. I mean, write in British English, the spell, that's, you've got to choose one or the other as an author, and I can't write in American. I don't really want to, so I write British English, and I am English, and that's really how that's. And I don't see that as an obstacle particularly. And a lot of people, have had a few reviews where they say, "Oh, that's very British humor. I didn't understand the reference." And I just kind of think, look, if you read widely, and you don't understand the odd word, is that really going to mess with your enjoyment? And you know what? Google it if it's that, And I do keep occasionally checking stuff on Twitter with people saying, "Is this a bit too Anglo? Is this a bit?" And and mostly I just think, do you know what? If it makes me laugh, it's going in, really, and that's, I'm okay with that. That it definitely has a English British sensibility. But then so did Hitchhiker's Guide and Red Dwarf and all the rest of it, and so I just think that's okay. I can't pretend to be something I'm not. When I used to write guidebooks, for Rough Guide. So it's a UK-based company, and we wrote, we were mostly Brits doing it, but then they released them in the States under a new title, same book, but they called them the Real Guides when they released them in the States. But they literally had a person going through, not just changing the spelling, but changing the reference, and they were just a horrible mangled mess by the time you'd finished with it. And you were just reading this stuff, so nobody would say those things. They're going, "Oh yeah, but that's an American would say this instead of that." And I was going, "Yeah, but I wouldn't have said it if that's what I thought you were going to do with it." So I don't think there's any point in trying to pretend to be something you're not really.
Yeah, word to I think that shines through though. Like, I would much rather read something by somebody that's got a really strong sense of its own voice and identity and knows what it wants to be, rather than something that's trying to please everyone. I think you try and please everyone, you lose what makes it unique in the first place. You end up with kind of design by committee, paste, basically wallpaper paste. I've certainly read a lot of books that are, they're like,
well, which is why self-publishing is quite nice.
Yeah, well, yeah, you may have had an editor try and tone down some of the references or query some of the references, and maybe would have argued about them, but in the end, I wrote the book I wanted and published the book I wanted, so I'm happy with that.
And I think, honestly, I think the readers are as well. I've only heard good things back so far, and yeah, it was just really, it was a good breath of fresh air in between reads, and especially when it comes to sci-fi, a lot of sci-fi is so heavy hitting, is so makes you have to rethink everything. And like you said, like with the three body problem, I haven't watched it yet, but it's everybody and their cousins watching it right now, and it's nice to just get something that is still within the realm of sci-fi without feeling like I need to completely immerse myself into it to appreciate it as much as I did.
Yeah, I think the things I've enjoyed reading most recently are have been indie sci-fi stuff, but they have that lightness of tone. They don't take themselves too seriously, and there's a humor in there that you don't get. That then, some of the trad pub sci-fi that I've read recently, it's not quite, you think, how on earth did this ever get published? But you just think there's no humor in this, there's no soul in this, there's no, I'm just not getting it. I don't like to really pick out names. It seems a bit unfair on that side, but on the positive side, people like Jonathan Navarre, so he's got these spy-fi novels, he calls them, A Secret Agent in Space, they're great. Yeah, and so that or Dave Dobson's got this book Can I, which is in the self-published sci-fi final, and that's a
Yeah.
great book, and that's got a lot of good science in it, but it's funny, that's funny, and that just carries you a long way.
Books with a lot of character.
Yeah, and they're books that are memorable. You read them once, and they stay on your shelves, but they don't stay on your shelves to collect dust. They stay on your shelves just long enough so you start to forget bits and pieces so that you can reread it and fully enjoy it again.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah.
I was gonna say I'm looking at the timer. We got 4.5 minutes left.
Oh, all
We're
right.
doing pretty good for time.
Yeah, that was quick.
Yeah, we're doing all right. So you have Orphan Planet and then Twin Landing, and you're gonna have to remind me Twin Landing,
Starbound, Twin Landing, and then Starbound. So it's a trilogy, and they all came out. The last one came out towards the end of last year. So they're all out. It's a full story arc, so it finishes very satisfyingly at the end of book 3. But it's definitely wide open for more books in a series if I feel like going there. And or side projects with the characters or whatever, but you can read the 3 books and be very happy that you've reached the end of a story, which was always my intention. And then but then I thought I'd give it a year. I thought I'd wait, and so I'm writing some standalones in the meantime, so that's really what I'm working on next.
So I was gonna ask, so you have this series, you have the standalone you're working on now.
I have 2. I've got one that's just about to come out this summer, which is it's I'm calling it a caper. It's a sci-fi adventure. It's a what if you met an alien on a train. It's 3 students doing Eurail, Interrail, and they meet an alien on a train, and it's a sci-fi cross Europe chase adventure. So that'll be coming out in a couple of months, and then the one that Stephen's had an early look at, that'll be out towards the end of the year. So yeah, and that's the little aliens in a lock. So that's kind of a local hero kind of vibe. You can imagine the kind of small Scottish island environment that's going to be set in, but I'm just going to stick some aliens into the mix.
That's fantastic. Two quick things as we have 2.5 minutes left. First off, I completely forgot to mention this. You have a soundtrack for this, don't you?
Yeah, on Spotify there is for Orphan Planet. I keep meaning to do them for the other 2 books as well. The Orphan Planet's playlist was theoretically what they might be listening to as they travel across the galaxy to their new home, because the Odyssey Earth, the ship they're on, is a colony ship going to settle a new planet. So it's 20 great traveling across the universe tracks. But I need to do a second one for Twin Landing that's kind of castaway in space kind of mix, and then I have to think about the third one. But yeah, you can find it. I think if you just go on Spotify and search for Rex Burke Odyssey Earth, you'll find the playlist.
Honestly, amazing. I don't know very many stories that have accompanying playlists. I know Future Proof had a couple songs, which was incredible on its own, but it's cool to see all these little additions that you've included. And finally, I want to ask, if people want to keep up with you, what's the best way to get a hold of you? Is it Twitter, Facebook?
Yeah, Twitter. I'm active on Twitter, so I'm at Sci-Fi Rex on Twitter. And I have a website, rexburke.com, and you can sign up for the newsletter there, and then you're going to get some monthly news about what I'm up to and the new books, and there's a free short story in the Odyssey Earth universe for the sign up. So those are the 2 places: rexburke.com and Sci-Fi Rex on Twitter.
And we will add all of those in the little description box below. But we've got about 30 seconds left. So thank you again so much, Rex, for being here. Thanks, Steve, as always. If you managed to make it 40 minutes into an interview and you forgot, the story was Orphan Planet by Rex Burke. Take care, everybody, and thank you all so much.
Thank you for having me. Thanks a lot.
Take care, guys.
Godspeed.
Bye now.